He was born in the cold wilderness of Mongolia, abandoned, betrayed, hunted like an animal. Yet, from nothing, he forged the largest empire the world has ever seen. His name struck fear across continents, his armies moved like storms, and his ambition reshaped history itself. This is the story of Genghis Khan and how he conquered the world. The story of the Mongol Empire begins on the harsh, windswept steppes of Central Asia. A place of endless skies, bitter winters, and roaming tribes who lived and died on horseback. Here, in the year 1162, a boy named Temujin was born into a world of constant struggle. Life on the steppe was brutal. Tribes fought endlessly over pastureland, horses, and survival. Loyalty was fragile, betrayal was common, and only the strong endured. Temujin's father, a tribal chieftain, was poisoned by enemies when Temujin was still a child. Stripped of leadership, abandoned by their own clan, his family was left to starve. The boy who would become Genghis Khan began life not as a prince of destiny, but as an outcast, scavenging for food in the frozen wilderness. Yet from these desperate beginnings, Temujin learned lessons that would shape his empire. He understood betrayal, so he valued loyalty above all. He knew the pain of hunger, so he rewarded those who followed him with wealth and food. And he knew that survival required strength, discipline, and unity. Slowly he began to gather followers, not through fear at first, but through trust. Unlike other tribal chiefs, Temujin promoted men based on merit, not noble blood. A shepherd could rise to be a general if he proved himself in battle. This revolutionary idea would turn a scattered people into the most formidable fighting machine the world had ever seen. By the late 12th century, Temujin had united many of the Mongol tribes under his command. His rise was not without bloodshed. Rivals challenged him, alliances collapsed, betrayal was constant. But Temujin had a vision greater than any tribal feud. He dreamed not only of survival, but of conquest. He saw beyond the endless grasslands of Mongolia and imagined an empire that stretched to the edges of the known world. In 1206, after years of war, he achieved the impossible. The tribes of the steppe gathered, and Temujin was declared Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. A new empire was born, forged not in palaces or cities, but in the saddle of a horse. The Mongol war machine was unlike anything Europe, the Middle East, or China had ever faced. Each warrior owned several horses, allowing them to ride for days without rest. They carried powerful composite bows that could pierce armor at incredible distances. Their tactics were ruthless and innovative, feigned retreats to lure enemies into ambushes, lightning-fast cavalry charges, and total discipline in battle. But perhaps their greatest weapon was psychological. Entire cities surrendered at the mere rumor of the Mongols' approach, knowing that resistance often meant annihilation. Genghis Khan's first great target was China. The wealthy, powerful Jin dynasty controlled northern China, ruling vast cities filled with riches. Against them rode tribesmen from the steppe, but the Mongols were no mere raiders. They adapted siege technologies, captured Chinese engineers, and learned to break city walls. One by one, great fortresses fell. The Mongols massacred entire populations who resisted, sending a message that echoed across Asia: surrender and live, resist and be destroyed. By 1215, Beijing itself had fallen. The Mongols, once dismissed as barbarians, had now defeated one of the most powerful kingdoms in the world. But Genghis Khan's ambition didn't stop there. He turned west towards the great Islamic empires of Central Asia. In 1218, after a caravan of Mongol merchants was murdered by a Persian governor, Genghis unleashed fury upon the Khwarezmian Empire. What followed was one of the most devastating campaigns in history. City after city was burned to the ground. Samarkand, Bukhara, centers of culture and trade, were reduced to ruins. Survivors spoke of rivers running red with blood, of pyramids of skulls built to mark Mongol victory. The terror spread faster than their armies, paralyzing resistance before battles even began. As Mongol horsemen thundered westward, Europe began to tremble. Rumors reached the courts of kings and popes of an unstoppable horde, riding from the east like demons. In 1241, after Genghis Khan's death, his successors invaded Eastern Europe. Poland, Hungary, entire kingdoms crumbled in months. At the Battle of Liegnitz, Mongol forces annihilated a combined European army. At Mohi, they crushed the Hungarians, slaughtering tens of thousands. The road to Vienna lay open, and Europe's fate hung by a thread. Yet, in a twist of fate, the Mongols suddenly withdrew. The great Khan had died in Mongolia, and the generals were called back to elect a new ruler. Europe was spared not by strength, but by chance. At its height, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. It was the largest contiguous land empire in human history, ruling over more than 100 million people. Yet it was not only destruction that followed in their wake. Genghis Khan established laws, promoted trade, and opened communication across continents. Under Mongol rule, the Silk Road flourished. Goods, ideas, and inventions flowed between East and West. Paper, gunpowder, and printing traveled to Europe, while European technology reached Asia. In this way, the Mongol conquests helped connect the medieval world in ways never seen before. But the empire was too vast, too diverse, and too dependent on the genius of Genghis himself. After his death in 1227, his descendants divided the empire into khanates. The Golden Horde ruled Russia and Eastern Europe. The Ilkhanate ruled Persia. The Chagatai Khanate held Central Asia, while Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, became Emperor of China, founding the Yuan dynasty. Under Kublai, the Mongols ruled all of China, building a capital at modern-day Beijing. Marco Polo, the Venetian traveler, would later visit and write of the wonders of the Mongol court, astonishing Europe with tales of its wealth and power. Yet with division came decline. Over time, the Mongol rulers grew distant from their nomadic roots. They adopted local cultures, lost their military edge, and faced enemies who learned their tactics. The once united Mongol war machine fractured into rival states, and the unstoppable tide of conquest slowed to a trickle. By the 15th century, the empire of Genghis Khan had splintered. Some khanates fell to rising powers like the Ottomans and Russians, while others faded into history. Still, the shadow of the Mongols lingered. In Russia, centuries of Mongol domination left deep scars, shaping its politics and culture. In China, the Yuan dynasty left behind a legacy of foreign rule that influenced the Ming that followed. And in Europe, the terror of the Mongols became legend, a memory of horsemen who appeared like ghosts from the east, conquered kingdoms in days, and vanished just as suddenly. Genghis Khan himself remains one of history's most controversial figures. To some, he was a brutal warlord, responsible for the deaths of millions. To others, he was a visionary leader who united a fractured people, established laws, and opened the world to trade and connection. His legacy is written not only in the ruins of cities, but in the very map of the modern world. For though his empire did not last, the shockwaves it created changed the course of history forever. From a boy abandoned on the steppe to the conqueror of half the world, Genghis Khan's story is one of the most extraordinary in human history. His empire rose in blood and fire, but its impact reached far beyond conquest. It was the story of how a man, born with nothing, came to rule everything. And though centuries have passed, the question remains, did he conquer the world or simply reshape it in ways we are still discovering today? This is Quest Revealers. If you want to explore more of history's mysteries, battles, and untold stories, make sure to subscribe, share, and join us on our journey into the past.